Chicago Tonight, Black Voices is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman, and thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, as a Texas law that bans nearly all abortions in that state goes into effect, we take a look at what reproductive health care means for Black women. Chicago public school students facing homelessness are set to receive microgrants from a new city fund. A local author reflects on the bonds of family and friendship and growing up in Bronzeville in her new book.
Footwork saves lives.
And how a popular downtown structure is paying homage to a classic Chicago dance style. First off tonight, last month's passage of Texas State Bill 8, which drastically reduces abortion rights in the state, has once again drawn the nation's attention to the issue of reproductive health care. But abortion care is just one part of health care where wide racial disparities persist, particularly for Black women. According to the Illinois Department of Public Health and the CDC, Black women are still most likely to die from pregnancy-related causes. More than 2/3 of pregnancy-related deaths in Illinois were preventable, and the leading underlying causes of maternal death were preeclampsia, eclampsia, and embolism. Joining us now with more are Felicia Davis, President and CEO of the Chicago Foundation for Women, Dr. Joy West, an obstetrician and gynecologist at Roseland Community Hospital, and Anya Tanyavudi, Executive Director of the nonprofit group Chicago Volunteer Doulas. Thanks to you all professionals for joining us today. Dr. West, let's start with you, please. What do you believe is the biggest contributor to that disparity in maternal health outcomes for Black women?
I think the biggest contributor to the disparity in health outcomes leading to Black women dying at an alarming rate is access to health care, which is drastically diminished in the African American community, mainly because of a lack of resources in the underserved communities. I think that Black women are dying at an alarming rate because of many of the systemic racism policies that have been in place for a long time. But I am happy that there has been a light shone upon the disparity in maternal outcomes. And I think that we are on the path to health equity in the Black community.
Anya Tanyavudi, over to you. As a doula, how can a doula help to improve outcomes for Black women in these instances?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a complicated answer. One, I really appreciate Dr. West, you noting the resource differentials, and I want to further name that explicitly, what we're seeing is a systematic expression of racism and misogyny that is converging in lack of proportionate value and care for the bodies of Black birthing people. And doulas are a mitigating factor, but we are not the solution. The solution is disrupting racism and misogyny's expression in our system. That is where the responsibility lies. What doulas provide is informed and compassionate emotional support, as well as educational support for folks in their experience of their pregnancy, their labor, and their birth experiences, as well as their postpartum experiences. And doulas can provide support throughout the reproductive health experience of individuals, including support fertility, as well as abortion needs. And I think what's critical about the support that Chicago Volunteer Doulas offers is that it's rooted in the values of anti-racism and the value of providing culturally relevant care to communities. And we believe strongly in the fact that we are operating in solidarity with the communities that we are caring for. We know that we are also victims to the systematic exclusion that our clients are exposed to, and we are operating in solidarity for our collective liberation.
And Dr. West, how can, you touched on this a bit ago, but, how can better health care for Black women in general, well before pregnancy, how can that improve maternal outcomes?
Great question. We know that there are so many chronic health conditions that women deal with even before getting pregnant. So we know that annual well women visits, or what we know is just our yearly checkup with the primary care doctor, even before getting pregnant, can improve maternal outcomes. So, for example, high blood pressure in pregnancy can lead to preeclampsia. If we can get women in to see primary care doctors to optimize their health even before getting pregnant, then we know that we have a better chance of managing the high blood pressure, for example, during the pregnancy outcomes.
Okay, and Felicia Davis, welcome back. I haven't forgotten about you.
Thanks, Davis.
Of course. What policy actions can be taken to reduce gaps in access to health care for Black women?
Yeah, it's a great question. I want to say for all the funders or people who can invest, supporting frontline organizations that are led by women of color. So like the volunteer doula, and Anya's here today, but supporting those organizations and investing in them with funds, resources, and investing in their leadership. The other thing is advocating to protect and support comprehensive sexual and reproductive health benefits in all forms, including contraception, including pregnancy management, including access to reproductive services, including abortion. We're lucky in the state of Illinois. HB 40 is the law of the land, the Reproductive Health Act signed by Governor Pritzker. And we need to fully realize the tenets of that law. It includes some implicit bias training so that some of these disparities with Black maternal health can be addressed. And I know that Dr. West and her colleagues were very supportive of that measure, and to make sure that institutions understand the responsibility to provide culturally competent care to women of color.
And Dr. West, both you and Anya have talked about this a bit, but just, for clarity, what are some of the ways that the systemic racism that each of you are referring to, what are some of the ways that that shows up, for example, in the exam room or in labor and delivery or anywhere else a pregnant Black woman might find herself?
Yeah, I'd like to say that systemic racism has had a tremendous impact on maternal mortality. And I'll give a specific example. We know that providers who are of the same culture as the patients that they serve tend to have a greater understanding of their needs. And so it became evident that, for example, Black OB-GYNs had a greater understanding of pain thresholds, a better understanding of just communication with the patients that they were seeing. We use Beyonce and Serena Williams, who had complications during their pregnancies, and the way that they communicated with the healthcare providers to have them to understand what they were experiencing. And so we know that something as simple as language and the way that we communicate between doctors or nurses and provider and patients is critical in terms of patient outcome. So we want to highlight implicit bias or understandings of the way people behave. Has a tremendous impact on what happens in the exam room. And I'll allow Anya, you may want to address that.
I've got Anya. I do want to move it over to you, but I wanted to ask, what kind of research and training should public health agencies be implementing?
I'm not. Are you saying what kind of
Or
research and
what should they
training
be
medical
looking
providers?
into? Yes. What do you think? What kind of training do you think public health agencies should suggest that healthcare providers administer? What kind of research do they need to have to help improve these outcomes?
Well, I think the research is really historical. There is a very accessible history available of the history of gynecology, which started with a doctor who performed torture on enslaved women in order to become the father of gynecology. And I think that understanding the historical underpinnings of the practices that institutions are engaged in and the science that institutions are engaged in, and questioning deeply how that shows up in practices is important. If, medical science was founded on the torture of Black women and perceiving that Black women were not experiencing pain
Right. So obviously
in the same way.
Yeah, so you're saying obviously this is a history that goes back for decades and decades. We're actually out of time. I'm so sorry that we won't have the ability to talk about more, but my thanks to Felicia Davis, Anya Tanyavudi, and Dr. Joy West for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, details into a new microgrant program for CPS students and families. Stay with us. Some Chicago public school students and families facing financial hurdles are getting more support from the city through microgrants. WTTW News reporter Matt Masterson has more on this. And Matt, how much is CPS offering through these microgrants and who's eligible to receive them?
So all told, this is going to be a $9 million fund put together by the city. This is being called the Chicago Families Forward Fund. And that's going to distribute one-time $500 checks to the students and families who are most in need within Chicago public schools. And the district identified those students as those who are in temporary living situations or those who are experiencing homelessness. So those students are by and large students of color. The city officials said that about 98% of students who deal with homelessness during the year are either Black or brown students. And these checks are going to help cover some of the educational and home costs that they may need during the school year.
And Matt, how is the city paying for this initiative?
So the city said that this money is going to be coming from federal dollars, specifically through the CARES Act, which gave a large sum of money to the city last year to help with coronavirus aid and relief. Those dollars are going to be going to help pay for these checks to the students this year.
And why launch the Chicago Families Forward Fund now?
Well, with students returning for in-person learning this school year, interim CPS CEO Jose Torres has made a big goal of his to re-engage with students who the district may have lost touch with during the pandemic and remote learning. So they believe that these checks, which will help cover, as I said, some educational costs, will help the district to re-engage with those students and bring some of them back in after a year away from in-person learning.
And for those families who are interested, who might think they're eligible, how can they apply or how can they be sure they get this?
There's an online application that's available through the Chicago Public Schools website, but families can also pick up a hard copy, a paper copy that they can apply through from any one of the Chicago Public Schools.
Okay, WTTW News reporter Matt Masterson, thanks for joining us, Matt.
Thanks.
And you can read Matt's full story on our website, WTTW.com/news. Up next, our latest Black Voices Book Club selection is about how Bronzeville played a role in shaping 3 women's lives. That's in a conversation recorded earlier. Journalist and author Dawn Turner has been writing about race, politics, and people her whole career. But in her new book, she turns her pen inward. In our latest Black Voices Book Club selection, we look at Turner's reflections on her own life's path and how it diverged from the lives of the 2 girls she grew up closest to, her sister Kim and her best friend Deborah. The book is called 3 Girls from Bronzeville, a uniquely American memoir of race, fate, and sisterhood. And author Dawn Turner joins us now to talk about it. Dawn, welcome back to Chicago tonight.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So the three girls that you write about, of course, are you, your sister Kim, and your childhood best friend Deborah, and it follows the three of you through your very divergent paths. Your sister was born when you were 3. Can you tell us a little bit about Kim and your family?
Oh, absolutely. When my parents brought her home from the very moment, she was a mystery to me. Headstrong, fearless, and stubborn. And my mother would say, that little girl's not afraid of anything, and that scares me. She was the one who challenged my parents from the beginning to the end. And I was the kid who was not perfect, but I was much more quiet. And so we were very different in that regard. And then she was, yes.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, she was just always on the move, and that was just her personality.
And then, of course, you became friends with Deborah later on when you were 8. Would you say that the two of you were an unlikely pair?
Absolutely. She had very much the same qualities as my sister. I would always say that Deborah and I were best friends, but Kim and Deborah were soulmates. And the things that I did not admire in my little sister, because she was my sister, I loved in Deborah. She also trafficked in trouble, headstrong, challenged the teachers. For me, rules were scaffolding. And for them, they were just something that they wanted to push out of the way. And really, it's that whole notion about opposites attracting, and that absolutely that dynamic is present in both of us.
Of course,
all of them.
In all of us. Of course, the fourth character in the title is Bronzeville itself, especially the private Lawless Gardens apartments where you lived and the nearby Ida B. Wells public housing. What role do you think, these buildings and these neighborhoods play in your lives as well as the lives of Kim and Deborah?
Oh, absolutely. This was our community. Was Bronzeville, first of all, was the cradle of the Great Migration. And our community was kind of in the middle. So there was Lake Meadows to the north of us, the Lake Meadows apartments to the north of us, which was for the Black elite. Judges and lawyers and politicians lived there. And as you just mentioned, the Ida B. Wells homes was in its heyday. It was a beautiful and just a beautiful and forward-thinking place, a haven. And it was supposed to be the answer to the awful tenements that the people who had come up from the Great Migration, during the Great Migration, they had to live in these horrible places. And Ida B. Wells was supposed to be the answer to that. And it, after a while, the city abandoned it, and it became a place where the conditions were deplorable. So we were in the middle. It was privately, Lawless Gardens was privately owned, but we were working class people with middle class aspirations. And so you had this tension between between the Ida B. Wells homes and Lawless. But it was kind of perceived. There were these perceived differences because we were all just people who were striving, but under very different conditions.
And during your time as a columnist at the Tribune, you wrote about Deborah's time in prison. And I don't think I'm giving anything away in the book here. Obviously, no. it'll all be there. And her return to college while she was in prison. What was it like, writing about a friend as she, writing about her story as it's happening?
Well, in 2000, I wrote about her for the first time, and that's when she was sentenced for 50 years in prison, convicted of murder. And then I wrote about her a couple of years later, just kind of a follow-up. And I realized those stories were very much a cautionary tale type story. But then when I wrote about her in 2007, she had graduated with honors, summa cum laude, and while in prison, graduated from college. It was something that she had struggled to do while she was on the outside. And that story resonated. I got letters from people all over the world, all over the country, actually, emails, letters. And because that story was a story about redemption and transformation. And I think we really, we admire those types of stories. We love the whole narrative of people who are able to change their lives. And that for Deborah and her prison experience, which I think is unfortunately a little rare in that she was able to do that in prison.
Right. She and the women who graduated with her are certainly the exception in prison. I also imagine it was painful for you to write about your sister, both your friend, but of course your sister Kim, who died so young. Was all of this therapeutic for you?
You know, I had never written about Kim before. In fact, when I started to think about this as being a book, I thought it was about two girls, Deborah. It was about Deborah and me, two girls who had taken two spectacularly different paths. But then when I started writing the proposal and I started showing it to people, then my sister, who very much her personality, left off the page, and it became a story about three girls. And yes, it is. I would not say that it's a story that has brought me complete closure, but it definitely has. I've got a chance to do research and talk to people and learn things I didn't know about them or myself. And it was just an amazing experience. And I will continue to write the types of stories, other stories that I write that have been an offshoot of, the two of them being in my life. But I think that this story, I get to put it to bed now.
Put it to bed, as the writers say. That's a good place to leave it, to get folks interested in the book as well. If they want to know more, they got to read it. But we're going to leave it there for now. Dawn Turner, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Again, the book is called Three Girls from Bronzeville, a uniquely American memoir of race, fate, and sisterhood. There's more Chicago Tonight Black Voices right after this. A Chicago dance is getting a formal debut as part of Art on the Mart. Arts correspondent Angel Edo shares how this massive projection titled Footnotes is paying tribute to a music and dance style that's had global impact.
It's about convening, bringing people together, and really maximizing the potential of this platform to catalyze conversations around the most important ideas, innovations, issues of our time.
Footworking is an art form that consists of both music and dance and has brought people together from around the world. Now it's bringing folks downtown to the building formerly known as the Merchandise Mart to see animated projections created by Brandon Calhoun.
Footwork, it's not just the dance, it's the music as well. So the music genre of footwork is a fast-paced, electric sound thing. It's always been like a futuristic sound to me, drum basses and patterns that's in triplets. So it's like a lot of energy in the music. So like the music is a thing outside of the dance as well that people enjoy that don't necessarily dance.
Chicago footworker P-Top says you can't have one without the other as he breaks down the history of footworking.
It went from house to ghetto house to juking to footworking. So footworking is not an easy thing, but it's not a hard thing too at the same time. It came from a community. It came from us expressing ourselves.
That's why footworking is about more than the art form. The dancers say it's about the communities it's not only saving, but creating.
Due to life situations and becoming an early age young father, I didn't have another outlet to release like stress or escape anything. So when I did see that, footworking became the biggest outlet for me.
It was just like a thing where it saved a lot of people. So the future of that, especially in Chicago, especially in like these impoverished neighborhoods, is like the more funding for it, the more outreach we got to kids and schools, the more they come in to get this energy off in a better way that's not violence. Footwork is not just a choreograph-based dance, it's also a improvisational dance. So we get to kind of talk to each other that way.
Co-producer Will Glass-Spiegel agrees and says that's why the Art on the Mart projections are imperative in giving the community and the craft the flowers it deserves.
It became much more than just about the music or about the dance. It became about, addressing inequality in a city where, people are facing the most dire consequences, especially Black communities. That kind of caused me to question, the appropriation of footwork outside of Chicago and think about how can I help, as a white person, make sure that the people who created this style continue to be recognized.
It's like a whole Chicago culture into one. Like, because you got bucket boys, you have a DJ, you have a singer, you have a dancer. Like, it's just, it's just a good mixture of everything, you know. And I feel like it's very important for younger generation and older generation because you inspiring and you showing, you paying homage to the people before us.
For Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Angel Ito.
You can see footnotes on the Mart at 9 and 9:30 in the evening through September 16th. And that's our show for this Sunday night. Join Paris Schutz and me next week at 7 on Chicago Tonight. The Chicago Architecture Biennial returns, and this time the focus is on the unbuilt. And a new documentary from Ken Burns on the legendary boxing champion Muhammad Ali. And before we go, yesterday marked the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. A couple of weeks after that fateful day was a memorable moment in sports history. In the first home game at Wrigley Field since 9/11, Cubs great Sammy Sosa ran onto the field holding an American flag. During the same game, Sosa hit a home run and ran the bases also holding a flag. We leave you tonight with images from that day. Now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Here comes the 3-0. Sammy hits a high fly ball, deep right center. Back goes Merced to the wall and right, looking up, leaping. That ball is gone for a home run.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.